No one here yet, so that's good.
All right, it looks like we have a full house here today. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this NACDA webinar. We're proud to bring you this amazing panel discussion in celebration of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We have an incredible panel with us here today, thanks to our NACDA Second Vice President, Pat Chun, Director of Athletics at Washington State University. So I'd just like to thank the panelists for being here with us today. And without any further ado, I'm just going to kick it over to Pat to get us started. Pat, take it away.
Dana, thank you. And then first and foremost, just I know there's a lot going on in our country right now, and our collective thoughts and prayers go to all the families who lost loved ones in Uvalde, Texas. And I know these are pivotal moments in our country where we all need to take a look in the mirror about what's going on, but we'd be remiss if we didn't at least pause for a second and send thoughts to those families. I do appreciate everyone making the time to join this esteemed panel. We will, if anyone wants to populate in the Q&A, I've been instructed to manage that. So off we go. Just a little history. I did some, yesterday was my day for research, but in 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed a joint resolution to become public law to celebrate Asian American Heritage Week. And then 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed a bill passed by Congress to extend Asian American Heritage Month. And then on May 1st, 2009, President Obama signed Proclamation 8369, recognizing the month of May as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And the reasons why it's been the month of May, in May 7th, 1843, the first Japanese immigrant arrived in the US. And in May 10th, 1869, the Golden Spike was driven into the first transcontinental railroad, which was completed using Chinese labor. So with that being said, that's the reason why May is being celebrated. But I think what makes today a lot of fun for me is we have three people on our panel that if you were to put down where they came from and their upbringing, you might at one point have said these three and what they've done with their respective careers wasn't supposed to happen. You have a female Asian American NFL analyst, a female Division I Asian American athletic director, a 36-year-old first-time head coach at Notre Dame. If the three of them wanted to wear t-shirts, they might wear something that says "Where the impossible happened." So I'm going to give a little background first. I figured I'd do this in what I would perceive highest SAT scores. So I know Marcus was academic all Big Ten. I know Vicky's the AD at Yale, but I know Mina also graduated from Yale, so I'm going to assume she had the highest SAT scores out of anyone. So Mina is an Air Force kid. Mother's Korean. Went to high school in Gilbert, Arizona. Got her BA in English from Yale University. Started as a business journalist of all things. I read a quote from the media writer Andrew Marchant that said, "There is really no formula for football phenoms. This is no truer than in the case of Mina Kimes." So Mina, just to warn you, Marcus is always in the market for football phenoms. So just be careful if he starts talking to you like you're a recruit. Vicky Chun is originally from Los Angeles. Parents are Chinese immigrants. She played volleyball at Colgate, esteemed career as a volleyball player, 1991 Patriot League Player of the Year, head coach of the volleyball team, 1996 Patriot League Coach of the Year. I think one of the rare, if not only, Player of the Year and Coach of the Year in their own conference. And she's the first female Asian American NCAA Division I athletic director. And finally, the third person on our panel is Marcus Freeman. Dad was also in the Air Force, mother's Korean. He was a high school All-American at Huber Heights Wayne High School, two-time All Big Ten selection, at least a two-time academic All Big Ten, maybe more than that. Fifth round pick of the Bears. His coaching career started as a graduate assistant at his alma mater, The Ohio State University. He's had coaching stints at Kent State, Purdue, Cincinnati, Notre Dame. And probably the most interesting thing about Marcus is he has 6 kids. 4 boys, 2 girls. Is that right, Marcus? That's right. So he is with a new job. He is a busy man. And full disclosure, Marcus and I go way back because we are from the same alma mater, and I was working in the athletic department when he was a student athlete. So we have some history. So with that being said, what I want to do is probably start this thing out with, if you can give each of the panelists kind of a 3 to 4 minute version of your origin story. And maybe I will start with, because maybe I'll go with Vicky first, because she is an esteemed colleague in this athletic director world. So Vicky, why don't you kick it off?
Thanks, Pat. And when Pat and I actually first met at a NACDA convention. They always had a list of names and participants, and I saw Chun. So I sought him out. And as soon as we saw each other, we were like, cousin. And we have been together ever since. And I love the question, origin story. And, you know, when I think about it, you know, I think of actually the movie The Joy Luck Club and related to the character June. And I watched it actually with my mother, and my mother, I'm bawling and she's not understanding. She's like, why you cry so much? Like, what? And, you know, because it brought back the pressures of playing piano, ballet, and, you know, for a tomboy, that was very different. I was an outlier. And, you know, through the years, though, my mom was always able to support me, even though she had no idea what I did. And so, you know, it was about, and once I got into athletics, I kind of broke away from my Asian friends and found myself an outlier, but in a different way. And so for me, it was about doing, pursuing what I loved, regardless of whether there were people that looked like me, and pursuing what makes me happy, and going beyond what people's expectations were.
That's awesome. Mina?
Yeah. Origin story. Wow. Okay. So you mentioned my dad was in the military. He was also kind of my best friend. We grew up watching football together. So it was always a passion and obsession of mine. I did play soccer. Although at one point my dad tried to get me to try out to be the kicker for our high school team, because I was able to kick. I said, Dad, I'd like to continue to have friends and not be incredibly uncool. So I didn't do that. After Yale, and as you guys know, and studied English, didn't really know what I wanted to do, tried teaching, really sucked at that, not good at the discipline side of things. But I did end up getting a job in journalism. So for the first 6 or 7 years after college, I was an investigative journalist, which basically can be summed up as writing about companies doing bad things and getting yelled at by lawyers. Very intense job. I went from Fortune to Bloomberg. But while I was there, continued to be obsessed with football, spending all my free time learning about football, reading about football, writing things on forums that I hope nobody ever finds. And then in 2014, ESPN reached out to me and they said, you're an investigative reporter, very hardcore, but you also post a lot of dumb memes and comments about football on the internet, and get in fights about it. And I'd also written a personal essay about football and my dad. And so they asked me to come be a writer, a sports writer. So for the first few years of my career at ESPN, I was a writer, profiling athletes like, I don't know, Darrelle Revis was my very first cover story, Jalen Ramsey, Don Miller, Aaron Rodgers. And then around that time, though, I started doing weekly podcast appearances with my friend Bill Barnwell, so more X's and O's oriented stuff, which ultimately led to me getting a radio show at ESPN, and then ultimately becoming an NFL analyst on our show, NFL Live. I'm also on Around the Horn, etc. I'm the first female NFL analyst in the history of our network, and actually there are very few non-players as well, maybe no one actually. So anyways, that's my job right now and I love it.
Mina, I know there's a lot of people in the state I'm currently residing in that want your Drew Lock versus Russell Wilson breakdown, but we can
Not great. It's not
we
great.
can, we can save that for another day because there's some diehard Hawks fans like you inside my athletic department. So, Coach Freeman, your background, your origin.
Yeah, kind of similar to Mina's. My father was in the Air Force for 26 years, and I have an African-American father, and then he met my mother in Korea, and they came back over here in 1976. Obviously, it was the first time for my mother being here in the States, and she had nobody and just had my father, and they had us later in life. So my dad was retired. He was 43 when I was born, and my mom was probably a little bit younger, late 30s. And so, you know, I grew up with this African-American father that was in the military, that was all about discipline and hard work and toughness and outworking your opponent. Then this mother from Korea that didn't know much. She just loved her family, was willing to do whatever it takes to make sure her family was well taken care of. And so my mother worked 3 jobs. And I remember as a kid, we grew up helping our mother, me and my older brother, helping our mom be a custodian at night at her 3rd job. And I thought that's just what she did, you know, and she got us into taekwondo when we were young. So my father did the football and the baseball and the team sports, and my mother got me into the individual sport. And I'll circle back around by why that's important. But I did taekwondo for probably 10 years, and I'm kind of transitioned to wrestling and really started focusing on football then. And so I go to college at Ohio State, and I didn't want to be a football coach. I had this thought that I wanted to be an athletic director, and I actually GA'd for somebody on this panel named Pat Chun. And obviously, you see, I'm in the coaching profession, so he didn't do that great of a job of teaching me the ways. But I was a GA my last probably year at Ohio State with Pat, and it was a great experience. And then so I go into the NFL. As Pat said, I was a 5th round draft pick, and I was your typical young person that thought they would play 10, 15 years in the NFL and would have so much money, you'd have to figure out what to do with it. And so after 1 year, I wasn't playing anymore. You know, they found an enlarged heart valve, but I was on 3 teams in a year, and the writing is pretty much on the wall. You know, it's not that you retire from the NFL. The NFL usually retires you when nobody wants you. And so I got right into coaching, and I developed a passion for young people, and I developed a passion for really, you know, seeing young people succeed. And, you know, everybody asks me, when did you aspire to be a head coach? I never sought out for a time and a place to be a head coach. I always looked for challenges, and I worked as hard as I could where my butt was. And I spent a year at Ohio State as GA and 2 years at Kent State and Purdue and Cincinnati. And ultimately, I went to Notre Dame last year as defensive coordinator, and this year they named me head coach. And so, again, it's been an unbelievable blessing for me in these 36 years of life. And but there's always been positive influence and people around me, starting with my parents and those other people, as Pat and many other people have helped create me to be this person I am.
So a little bit of a connector here. Mina, I have 3 daughters at home, 2 teenagers, 1 11-year-old. We all get a big kick out of the Korean flag in your background when you're I would assume broadcasting from your home. They made me stick. Marcus is my black belt from Taekwondo. My dad was a Taekwondo instructor. It is the only courtesy black belt ever given to a human being. So it stays in my office, and that's kind of the Mina Kimes, show some pride in your background that I got for myself, my daughters who label me a sellout. So that's why they made me do it. So what I'd like to do today is really build up to, because you guys to a certain degree are the first at what you do, and kind of an only, which is a pretty big responsibility. So really start from, we got your origin, I guess, when you were 16. What did you want to be when you grew up? Like, what was, because I know I didn't want to be an AD. I didn't know I did what this AD job is. So Marcus, we'll start with you on this one. What was the 16-year-old version of Marcus Freeman? What did you want to be when you were, I guess, a sophomore or junior at Wayne High School?
I think like a lot of similar student athletes, you thought you'd be a professional. You thought you would be a professional with your sport. And for me, it was football. And I kind of already mentioned it, but that transition went from football to, okay, maybe being in the administration side, and because I wanted to stay around sports. And it's funny how sometimes you create this path in your head, but God has other ways of creating it for you. And so, again, I learned very quickly when I got into coaching that I have a passion for really helping young people, serving young people, and seeing them have success. But definitely not what I thought I would be at 16 and even at 23. But thank God that I did get into this profession.
Mina, the 16-year-old at Mesquite High School, what did she want to be?
First, I want to say I got a real kick out of hearing Marcus's story, because when covering the NFL, I'm not super in touch with college as much as some of my colleagues. But when you got the job, and I think there was a picture of your mom, like maybe even taking photos, my friend Bomani Jones sent it to me, and he was like, "Oh, he's you." Like, because you have literally the exact same. My mom, my dad, my mom in Korea. He was in the Air Force, retired as a major. Yeah. So, anyways, it's just pretty funny. But 16, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew I wanted to do something with writing and reading. It never once occurred to me that despite the fact that I spent so much of my free time just engaging with football, that it would be something I could work in, pardon me, not even forget being an analyst or on TV as a writer, in large part because I just had never turned on the TV and seen a woman talking about it, and very few non-former players. So it just didn't even occur to me. It wasn't even a dream that I had because it just seemed impossible.
Vicky, kid from LA, would you want to be?
Yeah, I really didn't even think that a job in professional sports or college athletics like existed for me. So I went from marine biologist to a photographer to a movie director. And it really, it didn't come around for me, or that I thought I had options until well after graduating from college.
Now, were there people you looked up to in sports specifically during those teen years? And really, I guess the other thing is, were there any Asian Americans you looked up to? So, Mina, I'll go with you first on this one.
No, I mean, not in terms of Asian Americans or women, anyone who reminded me of myself. I just looked up to writers and broadcasters who I just now taped something honoring John Madden for the release of their game. I looked up to him. I just loved how he made football seem so accessible and fun. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was probably something I always wanted to do, to take something so complicated and simplify it for people. But it was something that I really looked up to in him and, a few other broadcasters growing up.
Vicky, people you looked up to in sports when you were a teenager? Or any
it was hands down Debbie Green and Liz Massakayan, volleyball players, one at SC, one at UCLA. And and it didn't even occur to me till much later in life that both were Asian.
Wow.
Right. I'm sure that is what pulled me. What originally pulled me was that they were shorter for their volleyball height. So I thought, hey, there's an opportunity. But when I think about it now, that connection, it really meant a lot, because I was seeing someone that looked like me, that was succeeding in sport of athletics.
Coach Freeman?
I think the two Asian Americans I looked up to most was Tiger Woods being one, just being at the top of his sport and the best to do it. And then Hines Ward. My mother loved Hines Ward, and, being an African-American, Asian American, and that was definitely someone I looked up to. And so it's a great reminder, as you're in the position you're in now, is that there is power in representation. It's natural to be able to look up to or gravitate to those that look like you, or maybe that have the same makeup as you. And so those were two of the guys that I truly looked up to as a young person. And then as I got into the coaching profession, Jim Tressel, who's my college coach, has had the utmost impact on me, and somebody I try to emulate daily.
Yeah, I remember when hearing the first time that Hines Ward was Korean, that was like, wow, like Super Bowl champion, MVP. I was like, that's pretty wild to hear that. And because especially growing up, when I'm older than never, I'm of the older age on the Zoom here, and we definitely, as a kid of the 80s, there was nobody that was competing at the highest level. Kids at school, I remember grade school, tell me, you could never play sports at those levels.
Can I jump in here? Just covering the NFL as I do. We're kind of having a golden age for Asian American athletes in the league. Not just because of the numbers, but because of the pride that a lot of these players take in their heritage, whether it's Kyler Murray, who truly embraces his Korean heritage, Younghoe Koo in Atlanta, most recently in the draft, Kyle Hamilton, who of course Marcus knows very well, wearing that Korean flag on his helmet. It's all very new, right? Like there used to be like, oh, maybe he's Asian, you were watching the NBA, maybe he's got like a quarter, but now they're telling us they're proud of it. And I think that's a really cool thing that's happening in professional football.
I couldn't agree, because with Pat and myself, I'm going to put us in the same generation. The thought of even saying like, I'm a proud Asian, that would even say anything, just would never occur to us.
Yeah, and even like my parents, when they came to this country, the assimilation piece was such a big deal. Like I try to, like, I remember growing up and my parents would want me to just fit into a box. You're right, Mina. In today's day and age, I look at my high school age daughters. I mean, they are proud when they see Kyler Murray wearing a Korea sweatshirt. They're online looking to see where they could go buy it. Because they're proud of their heritage. So it is, you're right, that golden age is pretty awesome. And then for a generation of kids growing up, I mean, to have that type of representation, those type of role models, that's pretty incredible. So to get to where you're at, obviously the pathway hasn't been, is always filled with twists and turns and bumps. The next question I have is, talk about where adversity came into play, how you overcame it, and what did you learn from it to set you on your path. So Coach Freeman, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest failures I've had and some of the toughest times helped you grow the most. I think back to the one time I'm in the NFL and you actually get cut from two teams in the same year, and you have to learn how to fight, through those uncomfortable times, through those times of disappointment. And then all of a sudden, you find out that you have an enlarged heart valve and you can't play the game that you played your entire life. And so you have to learn to say, okay, on to the next chapter, on to the next task. And those helped me grow tremendously. Then I think back really to my 4 years. There's two situations that happened. The 4 years at Purdue, and you look over those 4 years and we won 9 games in 4 years. And that's, if anybody's counting, that's 36 losses. And so those were tough times, but to grow from those opportunities has been tremendous. And then I look at my first year at Cincinnati, and this is the one probably that had the biggest impact on me. I'm 30 years old. I'm a defensive coordinator at Cincinnati, and I think I have every answer, right? I'm the guru. 30 years old, you're a defensive coordinator, and we finished that season 96 in the country in defense. And you had to have a truly a look deep down into yourself and saying, okay, how are you going to fix this? How are you going to reevaluate and think and understand and say, hey, these are the things that I don't know. This is where we have to get better. And, as we had an unbelievable staff and great men around me, and we made some changes. And the next year we finished, I think, 8 in the country. And from there on, we finished pretty high in the rankings. But without those failures, without finishing 96 in the country that first year on defense, do you really look deeply into yourself and figure out ways to grow? And so a lot of those failures have truly made me who I am today.
It's amazing on the road, and I'm interested here, Vicky and Mina, but people look at 36, young, things have been handed to you. The reality is, and I've known you probably since your freshman year of college, the road has always thrown a curveball. And it's how you handle those curveballs is really what sets you forward. And, when you start at the bottom, when you start as a GA, you start at a MAC school and you don't have the successes you want, there's a level of belief that we all have to have that there are better days ahead of us if we keep believing in ourselves and doing things the right way. So appreciate you sharing that. Mina, adversity, you've had probably the most, starting as a business reporter. I can only imagine trying to talk about NFL. I follow you on Twitter, so I see all the attackers on Twitter with football knowledge that obviously don't hold a cup of coffee to you. But talk about an adverse moment on your career path.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple things come to mind. Growing up, I lived in like 10 different states, moved every year with my family, my dad being in the Air Force. So every year I kind of had to start over. Now in retrospect, I look at that as advantageous. It really taught me how to be adaptable and also brought me a lot closer to my family. But at the time it sucked because nobody would come to my birthday party in September. But more recently, I would say, like for me, transitioning from being a writer, we were kind of, behind the scenes collecting information, what have you, to being a personality and giving opinions was very challenging. It doesn't, I just think, being a woman in sports, it doesn't come naturally to you. I remember when I first started doing shows, not the football show, but just general shows, producers would constantly be in my ears telling me, get in. And I'd be, talking to guys, always guys who didn't even cover football and frankly were wrong about a lot of things, but I was very apprehensive about interrupting them. Now I'm on First Take. So it's, and I guess along the lines of what you said, I get called a diversity hire every day, probably more than once a day if I actually look at social media. And so I think, and that's the nice stuff. So I think for me, learning how to compartmentalize protect my mentals, as the great Marshawn Lynch once said, has been a very important part of me learning how to do this job. And it's something that I think goes way beyond me, because I think it's something that every kid right now is dealing with.
Yeah, and Mina, you're good. And you know, the NFL live show, when you're on, you can tell when people, when groups of people have chemistry on air. It's why that NBA on TNT works. It's why your show works, because and all teams have to have great chemistry, and the chemistry with you and your teammates on that NFL live is jumps off the screen, and that's what makes that show a success. So Vicky, adversity.
Well, we have the same profession, so
Every day.
you live through that every day. And I've really come to a point where we don't get better without adversity, right? Even when we're born, we're in this nice warm thing, boom, you're out in the cold world, you get slapped, you're crying, and then you keep moving on. And so when I think about like the latest adversity, it just makes you one, really look at who's there for you during that adversity, right? And you don't really know until you go through something, and then you get through it. And when I think about that, when I first came to Yale, we had varsity blues. And then my first home Yale-Harvard football game, there was a protest. And then we don't have lights. And of course, it was getting late because of the protests. And after that game, I remember thinking, oh my God, this is like smooth sailing. Then COVID came. And so, and then God, I hope we're coming out of the COVID. We're back to competing again. But, that year and a half of halting athletics really, it made me think, okay, now I know why I love being an AD and why I love being in athletics. And when it's taken away, you're trying to pivot and really see how we can get out of it better. And I think we did that. I think the Ivy League has come out. The teams came out really strong, and it's something that we wouldn't have been able to do so much of what we've done without having that. Now, I wish to God we didn't go through this as a world, but it does it does make you kind of focus and figure things out a little bit more, and trying to being a little bit more creative and patience. So it will keep coming, but now I don't dread it, almost expect for it, and see how we can get through it.
So you three actually wear a bunch of different hats when it comes to representation. I'm looking at Marcus, and I mean, the numbers are not great in terms of people of color in head coaching positions, Black, Asian American. Mina, woman, Asian American doing sports. Vicky, Asian American woman being a Division I athletic director. So you have a responsibility ultimately, as maybe, oddly enough, you in your respective professions, on some of those hats, you're probably the first to carry the torch, but also, there is a responsibility to try to, blaze a trail for others, which not many people are made for. I've always told people that it's an honor to be the first, but the responsibility is not to be the last. If you can do something to help others achieve their goals, that's where you try to help and serve others. Marcus, have you thought much about the responsibility you have in your role from a social standpoint, from a kind of a trailblazer standpoint?
Yeah, I think there's been many different situations where you're often reminded. I think people often look at me and assume, hey, you're the African-American head coach, and not understand that, hey, I'm 50% African-American, 50% Asian American. And so I'm the first Asian American head coach at Notre Dame, the second African-American. And I take that title with much pride, and I remember when some of the racial injustice stuff was going on at Cincinnati, when I was at Cincinnati years ago, and a lot of our African-American players really reached out to me because there was a comfort in somebody that looked like you. And as you go to Notre Dame, we have three, as Mina said, three Asian Americans on our team. We have Kyle Hamilton, who was recently drafted. We have another young man named Jordan Botello, who's half Hawaiian, half Korean. And we have our quarterback, Tyler Buckner, is half Chinese. And so it's so important because we have an instant connection. You have it with the Asian Americans and you have it with the African Americans. And you have to remind yourself that you are a representation and that those young people look at you and those young people have an instant connection with you because they can see themselves in you. And so I don't forget that. And I don't take that for granted. And ultimately your goal is to be successful. Your goal is to be successful. Your goal is to help young people, but you have to remember you do carry a torch and you do give a lot of people inspiration to move forward.
Vicky, talk about being a trailblazer.
Sure. I think it's a responsibility that we take on by just being who we are. And, you know, like Mina, wherever I was hired, I did hear, oh, it's a diversity hire. They wanted to hire a woman. And there is, before I make any decision, it does go through that filter. Because I know if I screw up, it's just not Vicky Chun screwing up. It is a female and an Asian, quote, screwing up. I know I represent just more than my name. And I do carry that with me. So I will do extra homework on things. I'm not going to come to a meeting ill-prepared. And I'm really going to think through things because what comes out of my mouth or whatever decision I make, it's represented by so many things.
Mina, trailblazing on national TV, what's that like?
Yeah, you know, it's a little bit different because of the nature of my job, because if I make a mistake and it's not just me thinking, oh no, I've let down women or Asian Americans by by saying a player's name slightly wrong or something. Many men will tell me so immediately on the internet. But I think for me, a key point in my career was realizing to let that go, to stop being so concerned about representation and to stop viewing it as a burden, because it was actually holding me back from being good at my job, which requires a level of looseness and authenticity and fun. And so I think, once I started viewing it as an opportunity and not an onus, which talking about my identity, both in terms of gender and race, is really when I started to thrive as an analyst, candidly. And now I truly embrace the opportunity side of it. You mentioned I've got the flag. I also have a Korean flag tattooed on me, which, by the way, if you're ever wanting to get a first tattoo and not make your Korean mom angry, make it a Korean flag. She can't get mad at that. She wasn't thrilled with. But yeah, and so I'll be walking down the street and then, a group of Asian young men often will come up and say, that's amazing. I saw that on TV. I've never seen anything like that on TV. It makes me think I can be on TV. And I try to think about those moments and allow those moments to color how I feel about the very concept of representation.
That's awesome. What advice would you guys give to our professionals on here that feel like there is a ceiling? You three have kicked your foot right through that ceiling. What advice would you give to those as they're going on this journey, this path of trying to, for a lot of people on the Zoom to try to create their own pathway towards success when you feel like there's a perceived ceiling with you? Vicky, I'll go with you first.
Sure. Thanks, Pat.
Harder questions, I go to Vicky first, and I'll let the other two panelists think about it.
When I think what we're doing, what's happening now is we're owning it. We're owning AAPI. And, the start for AAPI that Pat, myself, Amy Huchthausen has founded is that, we kept close. But we always talked about starting an organization because there has to be more than just the three of us, and Ben Wynn at the NCAA. There has to be more. And so during COVID and what was happening around the country, we said, let's do it. Let's form an organization where other people that that look similar can and not look similar can get together and connect on certain on anything that they want to connect with. And we had our first breakout session yesterday, and I remember seeing so many AAPI representation who have been in college athletics for so long, and that I never knew them until yesterday. And so I'm thinking, wow, what an opportunity for us to own it and stay together. And really, you move up. You know, you have your bosses and everything else like that, but also peer to peer, your colleagues, they will help you grow. They will help you push you. And I think things like that, organizations such as NACDA, Women Leaders, I mean, for AAPI, all of this stuff is something that we should all take advantage of. I certainly did, and it really helped me not only learn the skills, but actually make the connections I needed to make.
Mina, advice for those who are on a pathway toward success, but feel like they have ceilings.
Yeah, I guess just speaking from my own experience, learning how to say yes or even go after opportunities when I didn't feel 110% ready for them has been a real challenge for me. I think that's a challenge that a lot of minorities, racial, gender feel, that sense that we've got to be twice as good to even qualify for something. Having, shedding that has opened the door for so many things to me. I think a few years ago, I started doing color for the Rams preseason. When my agent came to me, I said, no, I'm not ready for that. Absolutely not. The nice thing about having an agent is they pressure you to do things you don't want to do because they can make money off of it. So I did it, and I didn't feel ready, and I felt it was scary as hell, but I'm so glad I took that chance. And I think that's taught me to take more chances, even when I didn't feel I was completely prepared for them. And that's paid off in a big way.
Marcus?
Pat, I would say that hard work is rewarded, and control the controllables. There's certain things in life I don't think we do control. You do control how hard you work. You do control if you're ready when the opportunity presents itself. And are you ever fully ready? I don't know. Was I ever ready to be the head coach of University of Notre Dame? I don't know. We'll see. I hope so. But work your butt off. Work as hard as you can, and don't make excuses for those opportunities maybe that haven't presented themselves. They will. And if they don't, then that's not God's plan for you. So all I would say, my best advice is just continue to work tirelessly. And those moments that we do, myself included, feel like making excuses and that, hey, we're not getting a fair chance and opportunity. Okay, keep working and help each other. I think Vicky hit that earlier, is that how can we continue to help each other? I'm in a position now where you are a representation. So go back and help and help people maybe learn some of the lessons that I've learned. I don't have every answer, but I've learned many valuable lessons on this journey to becoming the head coach here. And so help each other out and be a community and work your tail off. That's the best advice I can give.
So I'm going to shift to a couple of questions here in the chat. So I know from personal experience, when I took my first AD job, I left my alma mater, Ohio State, and my mom actually pulled me aside and asked me if I got fired from my last job, because she couldn't process, how could you leave a good job? How did you guys explain to your parents that this is what you wanted to do? So Mina, since you laughed first, how was that specifically? For immigrant parents, it's just hard to process. Like this is what you're going to do.
It's a little complicated. My dad, being the Air Force man he was actually a lot more rigid than my mom, who sort of defies some of those Tiger Mom stereotypes. My dad was really the one with like the binders for every college I applied for, on my ass about doing extracurriculars. And my mom, was really encouraging of me to just pursue what I loved and my dreams. But I will say she was anxious about me leaving what at that point had been like a pretty good career as an investigative journalist to start over in sports, basically when I was like 28, 29 or something. She does have a little bit of risk aversion. And so, for me, it was just walking her through not only how much I love this and the fact that like the opportunity to turn your passion into a job is so rare in your life, you absolutely have to take it when it avails itself to you. But what might be possible for me, because much like myself, my mom didn't see people who looked like me doing it. So it didn't occur to her that it could turn into something.
That's awesome. Vicky?
Yeah, I've actually two stories. So I worked at the NCAA and I was really excited. And every time I would go home, my relatives would just ask me questions about my job, but it just didn't make sense. And for years. And so I said, we don't really do that at the NCAA. And they're like, NCAA, your parents have been telling us you work for the NAACP. And so they just had no idea of the difference, and the second story was when I got the position at Yale, my background was a tomboy. So I didn't play piano. I skipped Chinese school. I didn't do ballet. But what happened was Yale has great relationships with the Chinese newspapers. So they announced they had my picture and they announced in a Chinese paper, and boy, I could have been I was an instant celebrity without being a doctor or a lawyer or anything. And they were just cut it out. They would call me, no idea. I think they thought I was accepted into a program, but that didn't matter. It was that I was in the, Chinese newspapers, and it was, it just to give you an idea of, they're all happy for us, but they might not exactly know what it is that we do.
Marcus?
Yeah, my story might be as similar to me in terms of my dad was always the guy that pushed, go do this, go and try and have a plan. And my mother was she's such a faithful spiritual woman. She just, I pray for you, Marcus, I pray for you. And so when I went to Ohio State, my dad's always the one, you better get up early, you better outwork your opponent. And my mom's just, I'm praying for you. I just pray for you. And I remember the Colts found the enlarged heart valve. My dad first thing said, you better have a plan. You better figure out who you're going to call and what you're going to do. And my mom's, I'm going to pray for you. I'm just going to pray for you. And so that's kind of how it's always been. I think the hardest thing on my parents was moving from Cincinnati. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, so that's 40 minutes from Cincinnati. We were here for 4 years, and then I moved to South Bend, Indiana. And so you take 6 grandkids away from your parents, and especially my mother. And so that was difficult on her to see the family move 4 hours away. But what did she say? She said, I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you. So it's been great. My parents have always been supportive. My mother kind of just continues to pray for us in the spiritual side and be a support. And my dad's still the one saying, all right, get your butt back to work, And so that's how it's always been.
Marcus, I don't know if you have this dynamic, but I have the strict Korean mom, spineless Korean grandmother who lets her grandchildren and her granddaughters get away with everything. So the next question is directed to Marcus and Mina. This person is curious about your experiences growing up biracial. Did you ever wrestle with embracing your Asian heritage? So whoever wants to jump at that one.
I'll start, Mina. For me, I embraced it strongly when I was in Taekwondo, because that is a mixed martial arts originated in Korea. And so I did, but as I got into, probably later in my teens and became the football player, people knew my mother was Korean, but it wasn't something that I went out of the way to make sure everybody know I'm half Black and half Korean. But I think what you have to understand is if you don't embrace you, they're just going to put you into a category of how they view you. Right. And as I said earlier, people always, I felt, viewed me as the African-American, so as I got into college, I made sure people understood, no, I am truly half Black and half Korean. And I take a lot of pride in that. And especially when you're named head coach at the University of Notre Dame, I want everybody to know I'm half African-American, half Asian-American, because I take a lot of pride in both sides. And so if you're not outspoken about it, they have no other choice than just put you in that category of how they see you.
Yeah, I tapped out a blue belt right when we started breaking wood. I was like, I'm good. Soccer for me. These aren't good or built for that, although Taekwondo is more about kicking. So similarly, until I would say about college, I was described as white passing, honestly, and it seemed like a lot of people didn't recognize that I was Asian until I got older and I realized like I had similar to Marcus, the ability to influence how people saw me, to recognize what mattered to me. My Korean heritage growing up always mattered a lot to me because it was such a point of connection between me and my mother. I did do Saturday school. I did, do all of that stuff, but it just wasn't obvious to people. And it was a choice I made, and a choice now I make more than ever because, one, because like we've been talking about, I'm so inspired by the younger generation and how they've embraced it so much. That inspires me. And then also, I get now, I would say a nice mix of 10% racism, 90% misogyny. But when I see those racist comments, they make me even more excited to tell people who I am, what I came from, to change my background, because I want to drown them out with the people who feel good about it.
That's awesome. Vicky, question for you. I'll throw this one at you. What can we do to increase more participation in the AAPI community in athletics, period? Thoughts on that?
I think through support and showing that, we love what we do. And Pat is, we do hard things, except sometimes we forget to say, this is an awesome opportunity. This is an awesome thing to go into, and then seek out. Like I usually at conferences or anything, I will seek out every Asian I can find and tell them, hey, how are you in it? Let's stay in it. Can I help in any way? And I think we continue supporting each other in any which way we can. It will happen. I mean, we live in a diverse world. And so just look at the number of AAPI representation in all sports. And once they're in it, again, we don't want them to be the first. I mean, we encourage them to be first, but we don't want them to be the last. And I think we just keep supporting each other publicly, privately, whenever you get the chance to say you can do this, and it is welcoming and it is a lot of fun.
All right, so I'm going to make this the last question. This is coming from me, and we'll try to make it fun. So who is your favorite Asian American in sports or entertainment today? I'll go first because I'm from Cleveland and I know the NACDA offices are based there. So my new favorite is Stephen Kwan, the outfielder for the Cleveland Indians. It's amazing what he's doing, and he's a Pac-12er, so I got a little bit of bias toward him. But as a diehard Tribe fan, I am pro Stephen Kwan. So anyone can chime in with who their favorite person, Asian American in sports or entertainment, is now.
I'll go. It's interesting. I'm getting ready to speak here at a gymnastics end of the year gymnastics celebration, and it made me think of Suni Lee. And my daughter is a gymnast, and I actually used her story in a Friday pregame motivational. You think about, you're giving a pregame speech on a Friday to the University of Notre Dame defense, and I use Suni Lee as the example of making sure you capitalize on your opportunities. And you kind of read her background, and she had always been second to Simone Biles, always been second, and Simone Biles would do this and she would be second, and then she got the opportunity, and for her to capitalize on that opportunity and win the Olympic gold is truly an inspiration to me.
Yeah, I'm next. I was just at an event held by an organization called Gold House in LA honoring the Asian 100, and Chloe Kim was there. I was very starstruck by that. Taylor Rapp with the Rams, who's a safety, go Huskies, was there. It was just cool to see so many athletes like that. And again, I'll just throw out, man, so I cover NFL all year long, don't get to watch football on Saturdays much because I travel to Bristol. So as soon as the draft ends, or probably the Super Bowl ends, I just start cramming college. It's just like a nightmare download. So that's when I first started watching Kyle Hamilton, and I was like, oh, can't cuss here. Oh my God. And we did a piece on, or a bunch of segments on him at our show. And I spent a lot of time studying some of the things that I think he's really good at. And I just didn't mention that he was Korean. It just didn't even, I noticed that, but it just kind of slipped my mind. And I think people kept expecting me to bring it up, but I was like, this is like 100th on the 99 things this dude is good at. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I'm very excited to see him dominate at the next level.
Vicky?
For me, hands down, Nathan Chen, current Yale student, just an unbelievable person and a talented athlete. So in fact, when I got the job, I found out that he's going to Yale. So I tried everything in my power to get a hold of him and say, hey, we have a rink. How can we help? But little did I know that I would be able to get to know him and his agent, Yuki, who's also Asian. It was just also from Yale. It is just amazing.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys spending this, I guess, 55 minutes with us. You guys are all trailblazers. You guys have broken down barriers. You've proven what's possible. You've opened doors for future generations. You've debunked stereotypes. Mina, you're amazing. I appreciate you probably more than you know. My daughters, when they watch you on TV, look up to you. Vicky, I'm so fortunate to have you as a friend, and walking in this industry alongside with you and Amy makes this journey a lot more fun and a lot more educational for me. I've learned so much from you and Amy in the time we spent together. And then Marcus, I love you. I'm proud of you. And I know you're in like 20 different cities in 5 days. So I appreciate you spending time to do this.
Thanks,
All right.
Pat.
Thank you guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.